בוקר טוב לכולם. אנחנו כבר מאחרים טיפה התבקשתי לבקש מכל המרצים לדייק 20 דקות. כולם ידברו זה אחר זה והשאלות תבואנה בחצי שעה האחרונה. אז בעצם הייתה לנו הרצאת פתיחה שהיא, אני חושב, בגדר של הרצאת מטריה למושב הזה כולו. המושב בעצם כולו מתכתב עם הרצאת הפתיחה של פרופסור פרפיט. יהיו פה הרבה מוטיבים חוזרים כמו אימוץ שורשים יהודיים וזהות יהודית על רקע מקומי, חברתי, דתי, פוליטי, כלכלי, גנטיקה, אם רוצים או לא, זה מוטיב חוזר, ועוד כמה וכמה כאלה. והשאלה, אני חושב שנשאלת עכשיו, אם מה שנשמע כאן יהיה בגדר של פרשנות של הרצאת הפתיחה, או חילוקי דעות עם מה שנאמר עד כה. אני רוצה להציג את המרצה הראשונה, דוקטור שלוה וייל, שקיבלה את הדוקטורט שלה באנגליה. היא התמחתה בנושא הזה שהתדבר עליו, על 10 השבטים, מיהודי הודו ועד היהודים איך? עד כוש, מהודו עד כוש בדיוק. מהודו עד כוש, כן. מדובר בעשרות מאמרים, כולל כל מיני שבטים שהוזכרו כבר בהרצאת הפתיחה. בני מנשה בין השאר. אני רוצה לציין כן, שבבית התפוצות היא ערכה תערוכה מעבר לסמבטיון, כנראה ככה זה נקרא בעברית, כן? המיתוס של 10 השבטים. לאחרונה היא הוציאה ספר ביחד עם עמנואל טרוויסן סמי, שנמצאת כאן בסוף, כפי שפרפיט אמר כנראה. כן, אוקיי. בשם ביתא ישראל, The Jews of Ethiopia and Beyond, מ-2011, ועוד כהנה וכהנה. היום היא תדבר על הנושא איחוד 10 השבטים האבודים עם שני השבטים המצויים. בבקשה.
ברשות הקהל אני מרצה באנגלית. זה פה? או אפשר פה? סליחה? לא, אין לי מצגת. כן. כן. So I'm actually lecturing in English because I understood this session is in English. The unification of the 10 lost tribes and the 2 found tribes, but then I found a new subheading which I thought was actually better, the would-be's and the wannabes. This paper will examine the cacophony of claims associated with the 10 lost tribes, which invariably lead in a unidirectional path to a desire to join the found tribes who already make up a part of the Jewish people. In an attempt to fulfill the prophecy of Ezekiel that the 10 tribes from the kingdom of Israel will be reunited with members of the remaining tribes and there'll be one nation and one king will reign above them, some groups desire to return to the people of Israel by adopting Judaism in the Jewish state. These include the B'nai Menashe, who have been mentioned, who used to be called the Shinlung. This is a group of tribes from northeast India, Mizoram and Manipur, and others in Ghana, Africa, South America, or South Africa, who are meanwhile content to align themselves with local Jewish communities in the Jewish diaspora until the exiled will be indeed ingathered. This paper will examine the biblical origins of the 10 lost tribes theory, pointing out that 10 is not an exact mathematical number. Then it will look at the 2 existent tribes, asserting that 2 may also be inaccurate. Throughout, I will illustrate my point with examples from modern-day tribal groupings wishing to align themselves with the Jewish people, the would-bes or wannabes, as well as other groups who are associated with the 10 tribes but reject Jewish affiliation. On purpose, guessing that Judah would concentrate on different historical periods, I've taken in this paper the biblical issues, and I think that it will complement his paper. Finally, I will analyze some of the possible motivations for the worldwide phenomenon of affiliation as lost Israelites. I'll attribute this trend to increased globalization on the one hand, and to the rise in fundamentalism and a concomitant quest for messianism on the other. The result of this pattern is a more multicultural view of who is a Jew, emergent with a reinvention of the essence of the Jewish people. The claim to adhere to the 10 lost tribes of Israel dates back, as we know, to biblical times and is shared by thousands of groups throughout the world, from Africa to Asia to Australasia. While particularly pervasive in the Jewish world, it's important to point out that the story of the 10 lost tribes is universal. In the 8th century BCE, the northern kingdom of Israel was ravaged and conquered by a series of Assyrian kings, and the 10 tribes were deported in several different exiles. The fate of these 10 lost tribes has always been something of an enigma. Although it was generally assumed that the Israelites who were exiled eventually assimilated, particular biblical passages documented their place of exile. For instance, Divrei Yamim, I shouldn't go back into the Hebrew, but anyway, and various other texts, while prophetic proclamations like Isaiah 11 suggested that they continued to live on and would be gathered in latter days. Hopes of discovering the 10 lost tribes and belief in the possibility of their ultimate return were kept alive throughout the ages. Of course, we have a minority opinion by Rabbi Akiva and various Talmudic discussions on this, which I'm not going into in this paper. In this paper, I particularly focus on the biblical and contemporary contexts. In recent decades, the myth has gained currency as groups throughout the world are claiming lost tribe affiliation. And Jewish individuals and groups, particularly in Israel, but particularly in the United States, are seeking tribes who would answer to the description. These groups range from the Brit-ish, the people, the man of the covenant, in the English-speaking world, to the Maori in New Zealand, and to the Igbo in Nigeria. In Africa, claimants tend to gain inspiration from the struggle of the Beitar Yisrael, who are today known as Ethiopian Jews. Thus, the Beitar Avraham of Ethiopia, not the same as the Beitar Yisrael, who live in Addis Ababa, in a suburb of Addis Ababa, claim that they too were falashas. Now here we don't use the term falashas, it's stigmatic. But they claim that they were falashas, while, as we've heard, some of the Lemba of southern Africa and their advocates find evidence that they might have originated or migrated south from areas like Ethiopia, or there is DNA proof that they were Israelite Kohanim in the past. In India, several other groups are encouraged by the success of the B'nai Menashe. Now, this is interesting. If I'd given this paper 10 years ago, I would never have said this. But now, people are looking at the B'nai Menashe and saying, wow, they're successful, who received recognition as lost Israelites by Israeli Chief Rabbi Amar, and in the process of making Aliyah in different waves of Aliyah. The narratives surrounding these broad claims are convoluted, some based upon linguistic proofs, and others on physiognomy, as Tudor had pointed out, or DNA testing, however spurious. So who are the lost 10 tribes? The biblical narrative is particularly complicated on this issue, although everybody seems to think it's a totally simple matter. In the book of Genesis, Bereshit, we are presented with 12 brothers, the founders of 12 tribes. 10 of these, Reuven, Shimon, Yisachar, Zvulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, and Ephraim, Manasseh, the 2 sons of Yosef through his wife Osnat, roughly made up the northern kingdom of Israel, while 3 others, Judah, Levi, and Binyamin, composed the southern kingdom of Israel. If you counted with me, it makes 13, not 12. So how do we account for 12 tribes? One answer is that Manasseh and Ephraim, the 2 sons of Yosef, together represented one tribe, Joseph. So that would make 9, not 10 tribes in the Israelite kingdom, just pointing that out. Another is that Shimon was never allocated tracts of land for his tribe. It's written in Bereshit 49 that he was cruel at Shechem, and he received cities which were incorporated into Judah's territory in the southern kingdom. So he wasn't counted. So maybe that would account for the discrepancy. But there again, the tribe of Levi also didn't receive any land but cities, as we know. It's repeated in Joshua 14, verse 4. And they gave no portion unto the Levites in the land, save cities to dwell in, and the suburbs thereof for their cattle and for their substance. And as we know from the end of Genesis, and Shimon and Levi were brethren, weapons of violence are their sword. The first time we encounter the 10 tribes per se, the actual 10 tribes, is in 1 Kings 11:31, when God tells Jeroboam that he will tear the kingdom apart from Solomon and give him 10 tribes. But in practice, it ends up being 9 without Shimon. Is it possible that some or all of the Shimon tribe became part of the kingdom of Judah? But, according to 2 Kings 18, verses 13, they were also exiled by King Sennacherib, who attacked the fortified cities of Judah. Another answer to the conundrum is that Manasseh itself was split into 2 half-tribes, one on the eastern side of the River Jordan and the other on the western side of the River Jordan, so that Manasseh, who was, in the first account, a twin tribe, now becomes a half-tribe. It now appears that the 10 lost tribes may have been 9.5, who were exiled by a series of Assyrian kings between the years 740 to 722 BCE, and included the eastern Manassehs, although the western Manassehs were eventually deported to Israel several years later, as we know. They were deported, according to 2 Kings 17, and this is repeated in the report in Divrei Yamim and Chronicles, to Halach, Chabor, the river of Gazan, and the cities of Medes. Archaeologists have identified Halach with the city of Nimrod in present-day Iraq, and Chabor with the site of Tel Halaf in northeastern Syria. An Ostracan discovered at Halach, bearing Semitic names such as Menachem, Hananel, and Navdael, testifies to the presence of Israelite craftsmen in the great Assyrian city. A letter dating back to the 8th century BCE found at Tel Halaf contains the Hebrew names of Assyrian officials, Neriah and Palatia. The cities of Medes are found in today's Iran, and Gozan has even been associated with the river Ganges, as well as other locations. The general and most favored geographical area for the Assyrian exile is Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, that kind of area. Popular candidates for the title of lost Israelites are therefore the Pathans or Pashtuns, numbering more than 15 million souls. And just in case you've got to think that you haven't got enough room here in Israel and we have to give back territory, this is going to be a problem. The Pathans, who make up the largest single tribe in the world, inhabit an extensive area from Afghanistan through Pakistan to Kashmir in India. They are divided into distinct local tribes, reminiscent of the lost 10 tribes. Rabbani may be Reuben, Shinwari, Shimon, Afridi, Ephraim, Yusufzai is the sons of Yosef. Travelers and even scholars, mentioned in the African context, but here, write of their sallow skins and dark hair and eyes, stature, beards, and peyot. Here they've got peyot, which constitute for them a typically Jewish profile. Observers testify that they perform Brit Milah, circumcision on their boys on the 8th day or after. The women observe purification laws, and the Pathans wear amulets which may contain the words of the Shema. Interestingly, the leading members of today's Taliban are Pathans, who unabashedly call themselves Bnei Israel. Okay, the unification with the found tribes. Given that the 10 lost tribes are dissimilar peoples, some praying to reunite with the Jewish people and others, like the Taliban, rejecting our existence, with whom exactly are all these disparate peoples supposed to unite? The prophet Jeremiah proclaimed that at the end of days, the house of Judah will walk with the house of Israel, and they shall come together from the land of the north to the land that I give you for an inheritance for your fathers. According to Isaiah, the Lord will set up an ensign nest for the nations and will assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. And at the end of days, God will gather in the lost Israelites and reunite them with the dispersed of Judah. However, it is unclear whether Judah represents the kingdom of Judah and how many tribes are included there. For if 10 tribes were dispersed, 2 tribes should have remained. In practice, however, the kingdom of Judah was constituted by several tribes, Judah and Binyamin, as mentioned in Melachim 1, Levi, who, as we said, didn't have any territory, and probably some of Shimon. So, as with the designation of the 10 tribes, the 2 tribes is also a mathematical conundrum. The strategic biblical verse relating to the unification of the so-called 10 lost tribes with the remaining two found tribes is a passage from Ezekiel 37. The prophet is instructed to take 2 sticks, one for Judah and the children of Israel, and the other for Joseph, for Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel, and his companions, and join them together as one stick or branch of a tree. This prophecy has been pictorialized in the Dura Europa synagogue in Syria, as you probably, some of you may know. According to most authorities, Judah represents the Jews, maybe because it sounds the same, and Joseph represents the 10 lost tribes. In other words, in the days of redemption, the 10 tribes will be reunited with the 2 tribes, and the lineage of David from the kingdom of Judah, who will become the Messiah, and they will become one. I'm not going into the Talmudic references, and I see I really wouldn't have any time anyway, but they have, of course, debated the unification of the 10 tribes with the remaining 2 tribes. Rabbi Akiva saying, La'olam lo yachzorun, they'll never return, and Rabbi Eliezer saying that the 10 tribes who are now in darkness will see the light in the future. The debate is not restricted to the Jewish world, but part of what Professor Torrance F. Torrance, the convener of the Church of Scotland, told me was the Christian Logos. He told me that his father, the missionary Torrance F. Torrance, who wrote a book on the Chiang Min of China called China's Ancient Israelites, he told me that they would be reunited with the Jewish people by first converting them to Christianity. So what are the motivations for this worldwide phenomenon of increased affiliation as lost Israelites? Some Israelites, like the Pathans, are not interested in reunification, but in replacement of the Jewish people, I would say. However, the vast majority are claiming lost Israelite status with the hopes of joining the house of Judah in the here and now, and bringing into being the future redemption. Hopes of economic improvement do exist. I will not negate this. The groups identifying with the House of Judah in an area of increasing anti-Semitism and spurning of Jews are often marginalized, out of caste, low caste, or impoverished tribes. The Beit Avraham of Ethiopia reside in the poorest suburbs of Addis Ababa. They're just one example. Another are untouchables in parts of India and alienated groups such as the Bassa or the Baleng in Cameroon. Nevertheless, pure economic motivations are often insufficient to explain the upsurge. Religious ideology dovetailing Jewish ideas on the redemption can account for much. In the case of Bnei Menashe, while economic issues are an encouraging factor in their aliyah, the overriding pull is an eschatological desire to be reunited with the two remaining tribes from the kingdom of Judah. The Judaizing Bnei Menashe managed to dovetail a claim of affiliation to the 10 lost tribes of Israel, a common myth in Judaism and Christianity, with millenarian beliefs. On the basis of the lost tribe of Manasseh claim, they demand a return to the Holy Land in the same way that other groups were gathered into the Jewish homeland. The transformations undergone by the Bnei Israel are rooted in indigenous religion, but also appeal to a modern yet traditional identity of ethnic autonomy, the seeds of which can be found in a cultural identity producing common membership irrespective of divisive tribal aspirations. This form of retraditionalization can be associated with a quest for an alternative form of nationalism other than the modern nationalism in northeast India. It dovetails past and future, ethos and nation in a formulation which defines a community of history and destiny, thereby binding the Bnei Menashe through another world religion to the Jewish homeland. The desire to claim 10 lost tribe status can be attributed to two factors, which have resurged in the past 2 decades since my own exhibition at Beit Futsot on Beyond the Sambatyon, the myth of the 10 lost tribes. Globalization, on the one hand, and an increase in fundamentalism on the other. Israel, taking its own small part in the globalization trend, sends thousands of backpackers each year abroad for the ritualized post-army trip, who come into contact with exotic and wonderful peoples as far afield as Ladakh and Papua New Guinea, where in both locations the young Israelis see similarities with their own religion. Israelite myths emerge in situ and are intertwined into past millenarian beliefs. Israel becomes a destined end, a place of nostalgia, a topography of desire. In this way, Israel itself is becoming a multicultural country, bringing into question the face of the once distinguishable Jew. Simultaneously with globalization, world ethnic identities have strengthened and consolidated, and fundamentalism has taken hold, not only in the Muslim world, but also all over Europe and in Israel. Hand in hand with fundamentalism is the quest for messianism. Eschatological visions have always been associated with the 10 lost tribes. Shabtai Tzvi is but an example. The heightened interest in lost Israelites brings into question the essence of the Jewish people, and to paraphrase a no-no, Shlomo Sand reinvents the Jewish people. Without corroborating Sand's claim that the Jews have no historical claim over Palestine, or that the Jews have no claim to live in the Jewish state of Israel, the issue today, I do not agree with that. The issue today is that the descendants of all of the house of Judah are being reinvented with lost Israelites into a new nation in the Jewish state of Israel. Thank you very much.